The shuttle carrying Devon Hale slid silently through the upper atmosphere of the imperial capital world, its hull glowing faintly as defensive scanners washed over it in invisible waves. Devon watched the enormous planet unfold beneath the window and reminded himself to breathe. He had interviewed dangerous people before, war heroes with unpredictable tempers, smugglers who carried plasma pistols even during casual conversations. But none of them had conquered 43-star systems before breakfast. The pilot glanced back from the cockpit. "Relax," she said. "The Emperor doesn't vaporize historians, usually." "Usually?" Devon asked. "Well, statistically speaking, historians are low on the vaporization priority list." Devon nodded slowly and stared back out the window, wondering if statistics were comforting in situations like this. The capital city rose from the surface like a monument to impossible engineering. Towers stretched kilometers into the sky, connected by glowing bridges where streams of vehicles moved like rivers of light. Orbiting above them were rings of warships, sleek, silent giants whose cannons could rewrite entire continents. Every ship carried the same symbol, a silver crown pierced by a star, the symbol of Emperor Nerys. Devon adjusted the small recorder in his jacket pocket. His publisher had described this assignment with suspicious enthusiasm. "You'll be writing the definitive historical account of the greatest strategist in modern galactic history," the publisher had said. What he meant, Devon suspected, was, "Please survive the interview." The shuttle descended toward a landing platform attached to the side of an enormous crystalline tower. Imperial guards waited there, their armor reflecting the sunlight like polished mirrors. Devon stepped onto the platform and immediately felt underdressed, underprepared, and possibly underqualified for being alive in this location. A tall officer approached him. "Historian Devon Hale." "That's me," Devon said, "unless someone else claimed the job while I was landing." The officer didn't smile, but Devon thought he detected the faintest flicker of amusement. "Follow me. The Emperor is expecting you." Inside the tower, gravity shifted subtly as they entered a transport corridor. The floor moved beneath Devon's feet, carrying them upward through transparent walls that revealed the city spreading endlessly below. Devon tried not to stare like a tourist, but it was difficult when the ceiling occasionally opened to reveal starships passing overhead like silent whales. They eventually reached a pair of immense doors made of dark metal that seemed older than the rest of the palace. The officer stopped. "The Emperor is inside." Devon cleared his throat. "Right, of course she is." The doors opened without a sound. The chamber beyond was vast, filled with floating projections of star systems. Hundreds of glowing spheres hovered in the air, connected by lines of light that shifted as fleets moved across the empire. Devon recognized several famous battle locations immediately: Orion Rings, Veles Corridor, the three-system warfront, and standing at the center of it all was Emperor Nerys. She was studying one of the floating star maps when Devon entered. For a moment, she didn't turn around, and Devon found himself staring in quiet disbelief. The most feared ruler in the galaxy looked calm. Her dark uniform was simple, almost understated. Long silver strands were woven through her hair, and her ears, long and elegantly pointed, marked her as unmistakably alien. Yet aside from that detail, she looked remarkably human. When she finally turned toward him, her eyes were sharp with quiet intelligence. "So," she said, her voice measured but curious, "you're the historian brave enough to write about me." Devon felt the weight of every guard in the room. "I prefer the word unemployed," he said. "It explains my decision-making process more accurately." For a moment, nothing happened. Then one of Nerys's eyebrows lifted slightly. "That's an unusual introduction." "I've been told my survival strategy relies heavily on honesty." She studied him for several seconds, as if trying to determine whether he was foolish, brave, or simply defective. "Very well, Historian Hale," she said. "Ask your questions." Devon opened his notebook and glanced at her properly for the first time. The words slipped out before his brain could stop them. "You're very beautiful." The room froze. Devon immediately realized several things at once. First, every guard had turned their head toward him. Second, someone near the door had quietly inhaled in horror. And third, Emperor Nerys was staring at him as if he had just spoken an unknown language. Devon cleared his throat. "That wasn't one of my official questions," he said quickly. "That was more of an Observational error. For 2 long seconds, the conqueror of half the galaxy said nothing. Then something unexpected happened. Nerys blinked, and suddenly she laughed. Not the restrained chuckle of a ruler maintaining dignity, a genuine bright laugh that echoed through the chamber like the delighted reaction of someone who had just heard the most surprising joke in the universe. Devon stared. The Imperial Guard stared. And Emperor Nerys, who had ended wars with a single command, laughed like a child who had just discovered that historians were far more interesting than anyone had warned her about. Devon stood very still while the most powerful ruler in the galaxy laughed in front of him. It was not the reaction he had prepared for. In fact, none of the possible outcomes he had imagined during the shuttle ride included the emperor of half the known star systems laughing like someone who had just heard a ridiculous joke at a family dinner. For several long seconds, the chamber echoed with her laughter. Then Nerys slowly regained control of herself, wiping the corner of one eye as if the moment had genuinely surprised her. "That," she said at last, still smiling faintly, "is the first time in 27 years that someone has begun a historical interview with a compliment." Devon shifted his weight carefully. "In my defense," he said, "most historians don't interview people who command fleets large enough to blot out suns." A few of the guards exchanged uncertain glances. Devon suspected they were trying to determine whether this counted as bravery or suicidal behavior. Nerys studied him with visible curiosity now, the earlier formality fading slightly from her posture. "You are not afraid," she observed. "Oh, I'm terrified," Devon said immediately. "I'm simply trying not to show it in a way that would look embarrassing in the historical record." The corner of her mouth lifted again. "Your honesty is unusual." "I specialize in unusual," Devon replied. She gestured lightly toward the floating star maps surrounding them. The glowing spheres drifted aside as if responding to her movement, opening space between them. "Very well, Historian Hale," she said. "Let us begin." Devon opened his recorder. "Your first major campaign," he said, slipping into a more professional tone, "was the Orion Rings conflict. The records say you defeated 3 enemy fleets with only a third of their firepower." Nerys walked slowly between the hovering stars as she spoke. "They expected a direct battle," she said. "Most commanders assume victory depends on weapons. And you proved them wrong?" "I convinced them their navigation systems were malfunctioning." Devon blinked. "You hacked their ships?" "No," she said calmly. "I sent them polite correction messages." Devon stared at her. "You want a war with customer service?" Nerys shrugged slightly. "Their commanders spent 6 hours recalibrating their systems while my fleet moved into position." Devon rubbed his chin thoughtfully. "I feel like this method should be taught in military academies." "It is," she said, "under the category of psychological warfare." Devon scribbled something in his notebook. "What are you writing?" she asked. "Never underestimate polite emails." For the second time since he arrived, Nerys laughed. The sound seemed to ripple through the room like sunlight. Devon began asking more questions, and the conversation slowly took on a rhythm. He asked about fleet formations, supply chains, and the political tensions that had started several famous wars. Nerys answered with calm clarity, occasionally pausing to adjust the star maps as she explained strategic movements. Yet every few minutes she would glance at him with a strange expression, as though studying something puzzling. Eventually Devon noticed. "Is something wrong?" he asked. "You are different from the historians who usually request these interviews," she said. Devon leaned slightly against the edge of the map console. "That's because most historians are very serious people." "And you are not?" "Oh, I'm serious," Devon said. "Just not about the right things." Nerys tilted her head slightly, her long ears catching the light. "You still have not explained your earlier statement." "My observational error?" "Yes." Devon shrugged. "It wasn't complicated. I simply said what I saw." The Emperor looked at him with the calm focus of someone used to detecting lies instantly. "And what exactly did you see?" Devon hesitated, then answered honestly. "Someone who probably hasn't heard that in a very long time." The room grew quiet again. For a moment the star maps drifted silently around them. Then Nerys looked away toward the glowing projection of a distant system. "You are correct," she said softly. Devon did not respond immediately. Instead, he pointed toward one of the star maps. "That system," he said carefully, "is marked with a victory symbol." Yes. What happened there? Nerys crossed her arms. The enemy surrendered after 8 minutes. Devon raised an eyebrow. 8 minutes? My fleet arrived early. Devon considered this. That seems unfair. They had declared war. That still feels like a very short war. Nerys turned back toward him, amusement returning to her expression. Would you have preferred I waited? Devon shook his head. I'm just imagining the paperwork. For the third time that day, the conqueror of the galaxy laughed. Somewhere near the doors, one of the guards quietly relaxed his posture. It was becoming increasingly clear that the historian from Earth was not behaving in a way anyone had predicted. And to everyone's growing surprise, especially Nerys's, she seemed to be enjoying it. The next morning, Devon discovered that interviewing the ruler of half the galaxy came with unexpected logistical complications. For example, breakfast. He had assumed the palace dining hall would be quiet, perhaps even ceremonial. Instead, he walked into a vast circular chamber where diplomats, admirals, scientists, and several species he could not identify were already gathered around floating tables. Devon paused at the entrance. An imperial attendant appeared beside him. Historian Hale, the attendant said politely, the Emperor requested you join her. Devon followed the direction of the attendant's gesture and nearly walked directly into a hovering service drone. Sorry, he muttered to the machine. The drone beeped suspiciously and floated away. At the far side of the hall, Emperor Nerys sat at a small table overlooking the city through a transparent wall that curved into the ceiling. Morning light reflected across the towers outside like waves of gold. Devon approached carefully. You invited me to breakfast, he said. I assume this means I survived yesterday's interview? Nerys looked up from a thin glass tablet displaying star charts. You survived, she said calmly, although several of my advisors recommended immediate exile. That seems extreme. They were concerned you might be contagious. Devon pulled out a chair. With what? Honesty. He considered that. Yes, that does tend to spread, if not contained. A small hovering tray descended between them, carrying 2 plates of unfamiliar food. Devon studied his carefully. The dish contained several glowing blue spheres. Should I be worried? He asked. It is fruit, Nerys replied. It's glowing. That is normal. Devon picked one up cautiously. If I begin levitating, I'm blaming the palace kitchen. He took a bite. To his surprise, it tasted remarkably similar to citrus. Well, he said, chewing thoughtfully, either that's fruit or I've accidentally eaten a decorative energy cell. Across the table, Nerys watched him with quiet amusement. You approach unfamiliar situations with unusual calm. Devon gestured toward the window, where an entire fleet of warships floated in the sky. When you're eating breakfast with the most powerful woman in the galaxy, glowing fruit feels like a relatively minor risk. Nerys leaned back slightly in her chair. You are adapting quickly. Historians have strong survival instincts. I thought historians spent most of their time reading old records. Yes, Devon said, but the ones who survive interviews with conquerors develop additional skills. Nerys tapped the surface of her tablet, and a small star map appeared between them. Devon recognized the system immediately. Valus Corridor, one of the most famous engagements in modern galactic history. You defeated 6 fleets here, he said. 5, Nerys corrected. The archives say 6. The 6th surrendered when they realized their allies had already lost. Devon leaned forward, studying the holographic map. Your fleet approached from 3 directions simultaneously. Yes, that required perfect timing. Nerys nodded. Devon frowned thoughtfully. Which means either your commanders were incredibly disciplined, she waited, or you tricked the enemy again. Nerys smiled faintly. I may have adjusted their communication satellites. Devon sighed. You hacked them again. It was efficient. I'm beginning to suspect half your victories are the result of sending extremely confusing emails. She laughed softly. It is surprising how many wars collapse when people stop understanding their own instructions. Devon leaned back in his chair. You know, he said, I'm starting to feel bad for your enemies. They declared war on me. Yes, but they probably didn't expect to lose because their fleet calendars stopped synchronizing. Nerys rested her chin lightly on one hand. You make conquest sound trivial. Devon shook his head. No, I make strategy sound creative. She studied him carefully. You do not seem impressed by my victories. Oh, I'm impressed, Devon said quickly. Just not in the way you're used to. And how am I used to being admired? Fear, Devon said simply. For a moment the conversation paused. Outside the palace window, several massive warships drifted slowly across the sky. Nerys looked toward them. Fear is effective, Devon shrugged. So is kindness. That does not win wars. No, he agreed, but it might win something else. She turned her gaze back toward him. And what would that be? Devon gestured around the enormous palace. A conversation where no one is terrified. Nerys said nothing for several seconds. Then she looked down at the half-finished plate of glowing fruit in front of him. You are the first historian who has ever criticized my empire during breakfast. Devon lifted another glowing sphere. To be fair, he said, this fruit is doing most of the intimidating. For the fourth time since they met, Emperor Nerys laughed. Several nearby diplomats glanced over in confusion. The historian from Earth had now achieved something no rival empire had managed in decades. He had made the conqueror of the galaxy forget, if only for a moment, that she was supposed to be feared. Later that day, Devon discovered that Emperor Nerys did not conduct all her work inside grand halls filled with star maps. Some of it, apparently, happened aboard a warship the size of a city. The transport shuttle lifted them from the palace tower and rose toward orbit, where the Imperial fleet waited like a silent constellation. Devon sat across from Nerys while the capital world slowly shrank beneath them. You're bringing the historian to a battleship, Devon said. Should I interpret that as part of the interview process, or a very polite kidnapping? Nerys did not look up from the tactical tablet in her hand. If I intended to kidnap you, Historian Hale, you would not have noticed the shuttle leaving. That's comforting in a deeply unsettling way. The shuttle entered the docking bay of the flagship, a massive vessel whose curved hull carried the silver imperial emblem across kilometers of armored plating. Rows of smaller ships drifted nearby like attentive escorts. Devon stepped out into the hangar and stared upward. The ceiling vanished into layers of metal beams and gravity cranes. Service drones moved through the air carrying equipment, while technicians in armored uniforms guided cargo platforms the size of buildings. Devon whistled quietly. This ship could conquer a planet just by parking on it. Nerys walked beside him across the deck. That would damage the landing struts. Of course, Devon said. We must protect the landing struts. They entered a lift that carried them through several decks before opening onto the command bridge. Transparent walls revealed the vastness of space outside, where distant stars burned against the darkness. The officers on the bridge straightened when Nerys entered. Devon noticed something interesting immediately. None of them looked frightened. They looked focused, disciplined, and strangely calm. Fleet status, Nerys said. A tall officer turned from the navigation console. Patrol routes stable. Outer sector scouts report no unusual activity. Devon wandered slowly toward the viewing window, careful not to touch anything that might accidentally launch a missile. You command all of this from here? He asked. From wherever I happen to be standing, Nerys replied. Devon looked back toward the officers. They seem relaxed. They are professionals. I expected more shouting. Nerys glanced at him. You have watched too many dramatic historical simulations. Devon folded his arms. In the ones I've seen, admirals always shout things like, divert power to the cannons. An officer nearby looked confused. Power distribution is automated. Devon nodded thoughtfully. So no shouting. No shouting. That's disappointing. Nerys walked to the center of the bridge where a large holographic map appeared above the command table. Several star systems glowed along the edge of Imperial territory. Devon stepped closer. These are your current patrol zones? Yes. He studied the map. You're guarding against an invasion. Possibly. Devon pointed toward a cluster of stars. From there? Nerys looked at him. You recognized the border quickly. Devon shrugged. I read your campaign archives last night. One of the officers raised an eyebrow. You read 30,000 pages overnight? Devon smiled slightly. I skipped the parts where you politely rearranged enemy fleets with confusing messages. Several officers tried not to laugh. Nerys crossed her arms. You mock my strategies. I admire them, Devon corrected. I'm just still amazed they work. A young communications officer suddenly spoke up. Emperor, incoming message from the frontier station. The room grew quiet. The holographic map shifted, highlighting a distant system. Display it, Nerys said. A transmission appeared above the table. A nervous station commander looked directly into the camera. Your Majesty, he said, a foreign scout vessel has appeared near the border. Devon leaned slightly closer. Do they look hostile? The commander hesitated. They appear confused. Nerys tilted her head. Confused? Yes. Their navigation systems keep recalculating their position. Devon slowly turned toward her. You didn't. Nerys remained perfectly calm. I may have updated their star charts. Devon stared. You hacked them before they even arrived? It encourages caution. The commander on the transmission cleared his throat. They are requesting clarification on why their map now labels this sector as parking area reserved for Emperor Nerys. Devon covered his face with one hand. You renamed the galaxy. It seemed efficient. Several officers on the bridge finally laughed. Devon shook his head slowly. I am absolutely including this in the book. Nerys looked toward the star map with quiet satisfaction. History should be accurate. Devon glanced back at the enormous fleet outside the window. You know, he said, most rulers threaten their enemies with weapons. Nerys looked at him. And I do not? You do, Devon said, but you also appear to threaten them with administrative confusion. For a moment the Emperor said nothing. Then she laughed again, and the officers of the most powerful fleet in the galaxy pretended very hard not to notice that their unstoppable commander seemed to enjoy the historian's ridiculous observations far more than any victory report. Devon spent the next several days aboard the flagship discovering something that historians rarely recorded about conquerors. They were extremely busy. The command bridge alone operated like a small city. Officers rotated through stations, drones delivered data cores, and the tactical display constantly shifted as fleets moved across distant sectors. Devon had claimed a small desk near one of the observation windows where he could write, while pretending not to eavesdrop on military discussions. Unfortunately for the Empire's security protocols, historians were excellent at pretending. He tapped quietly on his tablet as officers reported patrol routes and supply movements. Every few minutes he glanced out the enormous window where stars drifted slowly across the darkness. Nerys stood at the command table studying a projection of the outer territories. Devon finally spoke. Important question. The officers looked up nervously. Devon had already developed a reputation for asking unpredictable things. Nerys turned slightly. Yes, historian? Do you ever sleep? Several officers exchanged glances. Nerys answered calmly. Occasionally. Devon nodded. That's reassuring. I was beginning to suspect you simply recharged in a docking station. One of the navigation officers snorted before quickly pretending to cough. Nerys gave Devon a long look. You believe I am a machine? No, Devon said. Machines take breaks. A faint smile appeared on her face. I take breaks. Name one. She paused. Devon waited. Several officers leaned slightly closer, interested in the outcome. Finally, Nerys gestured toward the observation window. I enjoy watching star formations. Devon followed her gaze. Outside the ship, a distant nebula glowed faintly, its colors spreading across space like slow lightning. That counts as staring at work, he said. It is not work. You conquered half the stars in this galaxy. Looking at them is definitely work-related. The communications officer muttered quietly. He has a point. Nerys ignored the comment. Devon returned to his tablet. You know, he said after a moment, your archives are strange. How so? You recorded every battle in extraordinary detail. That is necessary for accurate history. Yes, Devon said, but the personal logs are empty. The room grew slightly quieter. Nerys continued studying the star map. My personal thoughts are not relevant to strategy. Devon shrugged. They are relevant to historians. Why? Because people are more interesting than victories. Several officers glanced at the Emperor carefully. Nerys turned to face him fully. You are writing a record of my campaigns. I am writing a record of you, Devon replied. Silence lingered in the room for several seconds. Then the tactical display flashed as a new signal arrived. Report, Nerys said. A sensor officer spoke. Long-range scan detected unidentified debris near the Velis corridor. Devon looked up. The famous battle site? Yes. Nerys studied the incoming data. Display. The projection shifted, revealing a field of drifting wreckage illuminated by distant stars. Devon leaned closer. That battle happened 10 years ago. Debris travels slowly in vacuum. Devon squinted at the display. Is that one of your ships? No. Good. It is one of theirs. Also good. One of the officers coughed again. Devon pointed at a fragment spinning slowly through space. Is that part of a command deck? Yes. Devon leaned back. You know what historians call places like that? What? Expensive mistakes. Nerys crossed her arms. War often is. Devon studied her expression carefully. You don't sound proud of that victory. I am proud of protecting my people. That wasn't my question. Nerys looked away toward the drifting debris. The officers remained silent. After a moment, Devon spoke again. You know what's interesting? What? You never celebrate your victories. Victory is expected. Devon tapped his tablet thoughtfully. That sounds exhausting. Nerys glanced at him. Leadership often is. Devon nodded slowly. I think that might be the first honest thing you've said in an interview. Several officers tried very hard not to react. Nerys raised an eyebrow. You believe I have been dishonest? No, Devon said. Just efficient. And honesty requires inefficiency? Usually. The Emperor considered that. Then she looked toward the drifting wreckage again. Tell me something, Historian Hale. Yes. If you commanded a fleet like this, what would you do differently? Devon thought for a moment. Then he gestured toward the stars outside the window. I would probably get lost. One officer laughed before quickly covering his mouth. Devon continued calmly. I'd spend half my time asking the navigation computer where we were. That does not sound like effective leadership. True, Devon said, but it would be an excellent travel experience. For the first time since the debris appeared on the display, Nerys smiled again, and several officers quietly realized that the historian sitting by the observation window had managed to do something no rival empire had accomplished in decades. He was reminding the conqueror of the galaxy that there were still stars worth looking at for reasons other than war. The flagship drifted silently along the edge of Imperial territory, while Devon slowly discovered that writing the history of a conqueror was far more complicated than he had expected. He had filled several hundred pages already, but none of them felt finished. Devon sat in the quiet observation lounge, his tablet balanced on one knee while distant stars slid past the panoramic window. The ship's engines hummed softly beneath the deck, steady and powerful. He stared at the blinking cursor on the screen. Chapter 8, he muttered to himself. The Siege of Orion Rings. He typed several lines, frowned, and deleted them again. A moment later, the lounge doors opened behind him. Devon didn't turn around. If you're here to tell me another fleet surrendered because their navigation systems became emotionally confused, he said, I'm running out of ways to make that sound serious in a history book. Nerys stepped quietly into the room. You appear frustrated. Devon gestured toward the tablet. I'm writing about the most feared commander in the galaxy, and every time I describe one of your victories, it ends with something ridiculous. War is often ridiculous. That's not the problem, Devon said. The problem is that the official version of you and the actual version of you are completely different people. Nerys leaned against the window beside him. And which one are you writing about? Devon sighed. That's the question. Outside, a distant star pulsed slowly, casting soft blue light across the room. Nerys studied his screen. You have written about my campaigns accurately. Yes. Then the history is correct. Devon shook his head. No, the battles are correct. And that is different? Very. He set the tablet down. Your victories are impressive, Devon continued, but the archives make you sound like a machine. I command fleets. You also laugh at glowing fruit. For a moment, Nerys said nothing. Devon leaned back in his chair. Historians aren't supposed to care about the people they write about, he said. And yet you do. Yes, that sounds inefficient. Devon smiled faintly. Very. They watched the stars for a while in silence. Eventually, Nerys spoke again. When I was younger, she said quietly, I wanted to explore the outer systems. Devon glanced at her. Not conquer them? No. What happened? She folded her arms. The first system I visited attacked my fleet. That seems rude. The second attempted an assassination. Also rude. The third declared war. Devon nodded slowly. So you decided diplomacy wasn't working. I decided survival required a different language. Devon picked up his tablet again. You know, he said thoughtfully, most people start with smaller career adjustments. Nerys looked at him. You disapprove. No, Devon said. I understand. And yet you still question the history. Devon tapped the screen. Because the history ends with victory. That is the point. Yes, he said gently, but it doesn't mention what you lost along the way. The room grew quiet again. After a moment, Nerys asked, What do you think I lost? Devon shrugged. Free time. She raised an eyebrow. And? Privacy. And? Devon hesitated slightly before answering. The chance to be seen as a person. Nerys didn't reply immediately. Instead, she looked out at the stars. Far below them, the vast hull of the flagship glowed faintly as distant starlight reflected across its surface. Finally, she spoke. You are a strange historian. Devon nodded. That's what the publisher said. What exactly did they say? That if anyone could write a book about you without accidentally starting another war, it would probably be me. Nerys almost smiled. And do you believe that? No, Devon admitted. Why not? Because every time I write about you, the story changes. She looked at him again. Changes how? Devon turned the tablet so she could see the unfinished chapter. I started writing about the conqueror of the galaxy, he said. And now? Now I'm writing about someone who spent 20 years being feared because the galaxy wouldn't let her be anything else. Nerys read the words silently. After a moment, she said, That is not the official version. Devon leaned back again. No, he agreed, but it's the interesting one. For a long time, neither of them spoke. Then Devon broke the silence. Also, he added, if I leave out the part where you renamed an entire star sector as your parking area, historians will never forgive me. This time Nerys laughed again, the sound bright and genuine in the quiet lounge. And Devon quietly realized something that made writing the final chapters of the book even more difficult. The more he learned about the conqueror of the galaxy, the less he wanted history to reduce her to just that. The flagship's observation deck was quiet except for the distant hum of the engines and the slow whisper of stars drifting across the glass. Devon had chosen this room carefully. It was the same place where several chapters of his book had nearly been deleted out of frustration. Now the final chapter blinked quietly on his tablet. He stared at the screen for a long moment. Then he sighed. I have a problem, he said aloud. Behind him, the door slid open. That does not surprise me, Nerys replied. Devon turned in his chair. She stepped into the room with her usual calm composure, though he had begun to notice the subtle difference in her posture during the past weeks. The rigid authority she carried when they first met had softened slightly, replaced by something quieter. Not weaker, just lighter. Devon gestured toward the tablet. I finished the book. Nerys raised an eyebrow. And you sound unhappy about it. Because I wrote 2 different endings. That seems inefficient. Very, Devon agreed. She walked toward the window and looked out at the stars. The Empire stretched across thousands of them now, invisible borders drawn between systems that had once fought each other. Tell me the difference, she said. Devon leaned back. The first ending is what the Imperial Court expects. And that would be? You remain the unstoppable conqueror of the galaxy. Brilliant strategist. Feared ruler. The legend continues. Nerys nodded slightly. That sounds accurate. Yes, Devon said. Accurate and boring. She turned to face him. And the second ending? Devon lifted the tablet. In the second version, he said, the conqueror finally gets tired of people being afraid of her. Nerys studied his expression carefully. That sounds unlikely. Not really, Devon said. You already started. She frowned slightly. When? Devon gestured toward the stars outside the window. The moment you laughed at a historian for telling you the truth. For a moment, Nerys said nothing. Devon continued. You spent decades proving you were the strongest commander in the galaxy, he said. The problem is, everyone believes you. That is not a problem. It is if they forget you're also a person. Nerys folded her arms. You believe the galaxy should see me differently. I believe the galaxy should see you accurately. She walked slowly across the room, stopping beside the observation glass again. Empires are not built on kindness, she said. No, Devon agreed, but they don't survive without it either. He stood up and joined her at the window. Outside, the stars burned quietly, distant and ancient. You know what I realized while writing the final chapter? Devon said. What? You didn't conquer the galaxy because you wanted power. And why did I do it? Because everyone kept trying to kill you. Nerys considered that. That is a simplified interpretation. It's the honest one. Devon turned the tablet so she could see the final page. I wrote about your victories, he said, but I also wrote about the person behind them. And the Empire allowed this? They haven't read it yet. A faint smile appeared on her face. You are a reckless historian. Yes, Devon said, but reckless historians make better books. She read the final paragraph silently. Several minutes passed. Finally, she asked, what happens after the book ends? Devon shrugged. That part isn't history yet. And what would you suggest? He looked out across the vast fleet drifting near the flagship. Well, he said thoughtfully, you could conquer another 20 systems. That seems predictable. Exactly, Nerys turned slightly. And your alternative? Devon pointed toward the stars beyond Imperial space. You once said you wanted to explore. That was a long time ago. Yes, Devon said, but the galaxy is still out there. She followed his gesture toward the uncharted darkness beyond the border. For the first time since Devon had met her, the conqueror of half the galaxy looked uncertain. What would the Empire think? She asked. Devon smiled. They'll panic. That is not reassuring. Give them time, Devon said. Empires adapt. She studied him carefully. And what would the historian do? Devon lifted the tablet. I'd write the next book. Nerys shook her head softly. You are suggesting the Emperor abandon the throne to explore the galaxy. I'm suggesting the Emperor take a vacation. A vacation that may last several years. Devon shrugged. Exploration takes time. She looked out at the stars again. Then unexpectedly she laughed. It was the same bright laugh that had filled the throne room weeks earlier. The laugh of someone discovering a possibility they had forgotten existed. You realize, she said, that if I follow your advice, historians will blame you for the greatest political panic in centuries. Devon grinned. That will make an excellent chapter. Nerys glanced toward the fleet outside. Then she turned back to him. For the record, historian Hale. Yes, that compliment you gave me during our first interview. Devon winced slightly. My most historically dangerous sentence. Her eyes softened slightly. It was also the first honest thing anyone had said to me in many years. Devon nodded. Historians specialize in inconvenient honesty. Nerys looked once more toward the vast, unexplored stars beyond her empire. And for the first time in decades, the conqueror of the galaxy did not think about new territories to control. She thought about places she had never seen. Behind her, Devon quietly saved the final chapter of the book. For the first time since beginning the project, he felt certain about the ending. Not because the story was finished, but because somewhere beyond the Empire's borders, a new one was about to begin.